"Mom, can't you just figure it out yourself?" My daughter's voice cut through the phone line like a blade. "I'm going to Italy that week." She told me she couldn't rearrange everything for me. Not for a heart procedure. Not for her 76-year-old mother. My teacup slipped. Hot water spread across the table. I watched the stain grow. Watched my life disappear the same way. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. At 76, I never thought I'd beg for a ride. Not money. Not help with groceries. A ride. 35 minutes to St. Brigid's Hospital. A cardiac ablation consult. They wouldn't let me go home alone after sedation. I called Clara on a Tuesday morning. The kitchen clock read 847. I had practiced the words 3 times. Clara's voice sounded clipped. Professional. Like she was trimming an email subject line. She told me about her Tuscany brand retreat. The deposits they'd paid. How the team needed her there. I held the phone away from my ear. As if distance could soften what I was hearing. I explained it was just a morning appointment. That I'd be groggy after the procedure. That the hospital required an escort home. She sighed. The kind of sigh meant to sound reasonable. The kind that lands like a slap across your cheek. She suggested we could schedule it when she got back from Italy. "It's a heart procedure," I wanted to say. "My heart. Your mother's heart." Instead, I told her not to worry about it. After I hung up, I brewed tea I couldn't drink. I stared at the lighthouse magnet on my refrigerator. The one Leo had given me 3 Christmases ago. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly. Like the walls were closing in. I opened my tablet with shaking fingers. There was Clara on a sunlit terrace. Beaming at the camera. Wine glass catching golden light. The caption read, "Family over everything. Building what matters most." The irony scraped against my chest. Like a rough seam on an old sweater. I set my cup down carefully. My hands were steadier than they had been in months. Funny how clarity can calm the tremors. I remembered holding Clara in a county ward. During that brutal heat wave in '97. Fanning her crib with a file folder when the old fan finally gave up. I remembered the night shifts at the library bindery. Glue caked under my fingernails. The smell of adhesive and old paper. Clara sleeping on the staff couch while I mended broken spines. Book after book. Story after story. All needing repair. I had been good at fixing things then. Family over everything, her post had said. The words felt hollow now. Like coins rattling in an empty jar. I called St. Brigid's back. Asked about medical transport options. They had city vans if I could tolerate the waiting. Sometimes 2 hours each way. The scheduler asked if anyone would be accompanying me to the appointment. I told her I'd manage on my own. The words sounded flat in my own ears. Like they belonged to someone else. I hung up and sat in the morning silence. The lighthouse magnet caught a beam of sunlight. I thought about beacons and their purpose. How they guide lost ships safely home. How sometimes there's no ship coming back. The apartment felt too quiet. Too full of echoes from conversations that never happened. I walked to the hall closet. I pulled out the banker's box from the top shelf. The one labeled, "Papers Keep," in my stern handwriting. Not the neat photo albums with their staged smiles. This box held the real truth. Corners worn soft from handling. Creases like battle scars. The certified check for Clara's first down payment. $40,000 from my savings. Labeled as a gift because Mark said family loans created awkward dynamics. Receipt after receipt. Braces when she was 12. Speech therapy for her lisp. Violin lessons she quit after 6 months. The tuition payment to Seaside Academy. $28,000 because Mark's new promotion required better optics for the family. Grocery transfers during their lean startup year. Gas money. Car repairs. Emergency dental work for Mark. I spread everything across the kitchen table. The papers made a rustling sound like autumn leaves. I drew 2 columns on a yellow legal pad. What I gave, on the left. What I got, on the right. By the second page, the mathematics felt almost cruel. Like a joke with no punchline. I had loved giving to them. That was never the question burning in my chest. But somewhere along the way, love had been repackaged as tribute. As payment for the privilege of being needed. From the small fireproof box came the important documents. The deed to this apartment. My last will and testament. The durable power of attorney I'd signed 5 years ago. Clara had insisted it was what responsible families did. Planning ahead. Being practical about aging. I stared at that power of attorney now. It looked like a velvet rope at an exclusive club. With my name written on the wrong side. The morning light shifted across the scattered papers. Dust motes danced in the golden beams. I thought about all the damaged books I'd repaired at the bindery. How you learned to recognize what could be saved. And what needed to be let go. Sometimes the kindest thing was to stop trying to fix what was broken beyond repair. I picked up the phone with steady fingers. Dialed Ruth Choi's office from memory. Ruth had been my attorney for 10 years. Steady voice. Practical questions. No judgment in her tone when she asked what changes I wanted to make. I told her all of them. I wanted to revoke the power of attorney immediately. Rewrite my entire will. Establish a trust fund for Leo's education. My grandson Leo, 16 now. The only one who called just to ask about my day. Who remembered my birthday without Facebook reminders. Ruth's pen scratched across paper. The sound was crisp and final. Like doors closing on old rooms. I thought about Clara's perfectly curated Instagram posts. Her brand retreats in Tuscany. Her carefully managed life of surfaces and appearances. I thought about Leo last Christmas. Gap-toothed smile gone now. Taller than me by 3 inches. Still holding my hand when we walked to the corner market. The one person in my family who kept showing up. Who asked questions and waited for real answers. The afternoon light slanted lower through the kitchen window. The papers rustled as I gathered them back into their boxes. Decades of receipts and cancelled checks and careful accounting. I had kept meticulous track of every dollar spent. Every favor granted. Every sacrifice made in the name of family love. But I had never kept track of what mattered most. My own worth. My own needs. My own right to be valued. The decision crystallized in my chest like ice forming on winter glass. Clear and sharp and unbreakable. This wasn't about punishment. This wasn't about revenge or bitterness or settling old scores. This was about stepping off a cliff and discovering I had wings. I folded the legal pad with its brutal mathematics. Put the receipts back in their worn cardboard box. Left the lighthouse magnet exactly where Leo had placed it. Some beacons guide you safely home. Others illuminate the path leading somewhere new. I was ready to find my own shore. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. The medical transport van arrived 20 minutes late on Thursday morning. The driver was young, maybe 19. Acne scattered across his jawline like a constellation of uncertainty. He didn't look up from his clipboard when I approached the dented vehicle. The door stuck when I tried to climb aboard. I pulled the handle twice before it gave way with a metallic groan. Inside, the air smelled like disinfectant fighting a losing battle against human sadness. 4 vinyl seats faced each other across a narrow aisle. Like a confessional booth designed for multiple sinners. A woman in a floral headscarf sat by the window. Her fingers worked knitting needles without looking down. Click, click, click. The rhythm was hypnotic, soothing, like a rosary made of steel and yarn. Across from her, an elderly man held a half-empty soda can. His hands had a tremor that made the liquid slosh gently. A quiet metronome counting down to something. Someone very young sat in the corner. Maybe 25. Thumbs moving over a phone screen in desperate silence. The light from the device painted their face blue-white. Ghost pale in the morning shadows. No one spoke. Suffering had office hours now. We were all keeping our appointments with disappointment. The van lurched through morning traffic. Stop signs that felt like small deaths. Red lights that stretched into eternity. Construction zones that seemed designed to test whatever patience we had left. I watched the city roll past the scratched windows. Coffee shops opening their metal gates. People walking dogs who pulled toward fire hydrants with purpose. Normal lives unfolding in normal time. Normal families making normal plans. We didn't belong to that world anymore. We were the forgotten ones. The medical refugees. The ones whose families had better places to be. St. Brigid's outpatient wing rose from the asphalt like a concrete monument. All sharp angles and institutional efficiency. No warmth in the architecture. No softness anywhere in the design. The automatic doors whooshed open. Swallowed us into fluorescent lighting and recycled air. The lobby smelled like lemon cleaner mixed with something that might have been fear. Industrial carpet the color of old regret. Plastic chairs arranged in perfect rows. Like pews in a church dedicated to waiting. Nurse Mateo called my name from behind the reception desk. His voice carried genuine warmth. Professional kindness, perhaps, but still kind. He had kind eyes. Brown like coffee. Lines at the corners that suggested he smiled often. He guided me through automatic doors into the pre-procedure area. Helped me into a recliner that had seen better decades. Tucked a warmed blanket over my knees like I was someone's beloved grandmother. I was someone's beloved grandmother. Leo's beloved grandmother. That still counted for something in this sterile world. Mateo had gentle hands when he prepared the IV site. Cleaned my arm with alcohol that smelled sharp and clean. He'd done this thousands of times. His movements were practiced. Efficient. But still careful. He asked if this was my first cardiac procedure. I told him it was my first time doing anything like this alone. The words came out steadier than I expected. No tremor in my voice. No plea for sympathy. He nodded. His eyes crinkled at the corners. Kindness that didn't require explanations or apologies. Some people understood that loneliness wasn't always a choice. The consultation room was small and windowless. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead like angry insects. Dr. Elkins sat behind a desk covered with manila folders. Charts full of other people's medical destinies. He was younger than I'd expected. Maybe 45. Wedding ring catching the harsh light. Someone waited for him at home. Someone who would ask about his day over dinner. He explained the procedure in careful, measured detail. Catheter insertion through the femoral artery. Electrical mapping of my heart's irregular pathways. Targeted ablation of the areas causing my arrhythmia. It sounded like science fiction. Like something happening to someone else's failing heart. He handed me a manila folder thick with instructions. Pre-procedure guidelines printed on hospital letterhead. Post-procedure care instructions. Emergency contact numbers. His pen hovered over the discharge planning section of his form. He asked who would be driving me home after the sedation wore off. Hospital policy, he explained. No exceptions. I told him I would arrange something appropriate for the day of the procedure. The lie rolled off my tongue smooth as butter. Polite and necessary. He frowned slightly. The kind of frown that suggested he'd encountered this situation before. Elderly patients navigating medical crises without family support. He reminded me that the hospital policy was absolutely strict. No patient could be discharged after conscious sedation without a responsible adult escort. I assured him someone would definitely be there to take me home. The biggest lie yet, but it bought me time to figure out alternatives. In the recovery observation area, I listened to the sounds of institutional medical care. Monitors beeping in different rhythms. Someone retching softly behind a thin fabric curtain. The smell of antiseptic couldn't quite mask other odors. Fear had a scent. Anxiety smelled like stale coffee and worry. A woman 2 chairs over was crying quietly into a tissue. Her husband patted her hand with awkward gentleness. He whispered something that sounded like comfort. Something about everything being fine. About going home soon. I watched the doorway where other patients' families appeared throughout the morning. Holding car keys and paper coffee cups. Looking appropriately worried and present. Checking their phones for parking meter time. Complaining quietly about hospital coffee. Normal family complaints. Normal family presence. I thought about Clara's Instagram post from earlier this morning. A sunrise over Tuscan hills painted in golden light. Her caption had been about gratitude and gaining new perspectives through travel. The irony tasted like copper pennies in my mouth. The van ride home took 47 minutes through lunch hour traffic. Same passengers as the morning trip. Same institutional silence. Same smell of disinfectant trying to cover deeper sadnesses. I counted traffic lights like rosary beads. 23 red lights between the hospital and my apartment building. Each one a small pause. A moment to breathe deeply. To steady myself for whatever came next. The knitting woman had finished something. A small square of blue yarn. She held it up to the window light like a prayer flag. Back in my apartment, I set the thick procedure folder beside the electric kettle. The yellow discharge instructions looked official and important. Like proof that someone somewhere cared about my medical outcome. Even if that someone was only the hospital's legal department. I opened my laptop out of old habit. Clara's social media feed loaded automatically. There she was again. Different terrace this time. Same carefully curated performance. She was raising a wine glass in a toast with people I didn't recognize. Beautiful people in expensive clothes. The caption read, "Choose the life that loves you back." Grateful for authentic connections. I closed the laptop on my own reflection in the darkened screen. The apartment felt different now. Smaller in some ways but also larger. Like I was seeing familiar spaces through completely different eyes. The lighthouse magnet caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through my kitchen window. Leo's Christmas gift from 3 years ago. 3 years of faithful service on my refrigerator door. I thought about real lighthouses and their solitary purpose. How they stand alone on rocky shores facing endless ocean. How they guide ships safely through dangerous waters and treacherous storms. How they keep their lights burning even when no ships are coming home. I made Earl Grey tea with honey. Actually drank it this time instead of letting it grow cold, the way my mother had prepared it during the Depression years. Simple comfort that required no performance or pretense. The manila folder sat on my kitchen counter like a small monument. Evidence of medical decisions made independently. A procedure I would face alone. But not because circumstances forced me into isolation. Because I was choosing this path. Choosing to stop waiting for rescue. The difference felt enormous. Like the vast space between drowning and learning to swim. I pulled out my phone. Scrolled through my contact list until I found Leo's number. My thumb hovered over the call button for a long moment. What would I tell him? That his mother had essentially abandoned me to medical transport vans and institutional kindness? That I was rewriting legal documents because love had somehow become financial transaction? No, that wasn't Leo's emotional burden to carry. He was 16. He deserved to believe in family love without keeping score. Instead, I composed a simple text message. Honest and warm. Thinking of you today. Hope the robotics team project is going well. His response arrived within minutes of sending. Love you, Grandma. Can I come make pancakes with you this weekend? I stared at those words on my phone screen until they blurred with unshed tears. Someone still wanted to make Saturday morning pancakes with me. Someone still chose to spend weekend time in my small kitchen. Someone still loved me without conditions or expectations or careful accounting. The afternoon light slanted lower through my windows. Golden and forgiving like autumn honey. I thought about next week's procedure. The early morning van ride. The hospital gown that never quite covers everything. The moment when they would ask for my emergency contact information. I would give them Leo's phone number. But I wouldn't call him to the hospital. Some battles you fight alone. Not because you're abandoned or forgotten. But because fighting alone makes you discover strengths you didn't know existed. Because sometimes the kindest thing you can do for people you love is to stop needing them to rescue you. The lighthouse magnet held steady on my refrigerator door. Faithful and constant. A beacon showing the way home to anyone brave enough to navigate by their own inner light. I was learning to be my own lighthouse. To tend my own beacon through whatever storms were coming. To guide my own ship safely to whatever shore awaited. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. At midnight, I pulled the banker's box from the hall closet. The one labeled, "Papers Keep," in my own stern handwriting. Written 20 years ago when I still believed in keeping everything. Not the neat photo albums with their staged smiles. Those were for visitors who never came. This box held the real truth. Corners worn soft from handling. Creases like battle scars across manila envelopes. I carried it to the kitchen table. Set it down with the reverence reserved for evidence. The first document made my hands shake. The certified check for Clara's first house down payment. $40,000 from my savings account. Dated March 15, 2018. The memo line read, "Gift, love, Mom," because Mark had insisted family loans created awkward tax situations. I remembered standing in line at the bank that day. The teller had asked twice if I was certain about the amount. Certain. I had been certain about everything then. Receipt after receipt after receipt. A paper trail of devotion measured in dollars. Braces for Clara when she was 12. $3,000. Her smile had been crooked but charming. Speech therapy for her childhood lisp. 40 sessions at $75 each. She'd wanted to sound professional, polished, ready for whatever success awaited. Violin lessons she quit after 6 months. The rental fee for an instrument that gathered dust in their spare room. Piano lessons that replaced the violin. Dance classes that replaced the piano. Each new interest requiring fresh investment. Each abandoned dream leaving behind only receipts. The tuition payment to Seaside Academy made me pause. $28,000 for 1 year. Mark's new promotion had required better optics for the family. A private school address looked more serious on company directories. I remembered Clara calling me that October night. She'd been crying about the other mothers. Their cars. Their clothes. Their casual mentions of weekend houses and European vacations. She needed to fit in. For Mark's career. For their future. I had liquidated my retirement fund without hesitation. Grocery transfers during their lean startup years. $200 every month for 18 months. Gas money when Mark's company car was repossessed. Emergency dental work when their insurance lapsed. A new transmission for their sedan. Registration fees. Inspection costs. Car insurance premiums when their credit scores dropped. I spread everything across the kitchen table like tarot cards predicting a bleak future. The papers made a rustling sound like autumn leaves preparing to die. I drew 2 columns on a fresh legal pad. What I gave, on the left side. What I got, on the right. The left column filled 3 pages. Single-spaced. Meticulous accounting of financial sacrifice. The right column remained almost empty. A few phone calls. Obligatory holiday visits. Social media posts about grateful daughters. By the 3rd page, the mathematics felt almost comically cruel. Like a joke with no punchline. Like a ledger written by someone who didn't understand how love was supposed to work. I had loved giving to them. That was never the question burning in my chest. But somewhere along the way, love had been repackaged as tribute. As payment for the privilege of being needed by people who resented the needing. From the small fireproof box came the documents that really mattered. The deed to this apartment. My last will and testament. Handwritten notes about funeral arrangements. The durable power of attorney I'd signed 5 years ago without reading carefully. Clara had brought the papers to me on a Tuesday afternoon. Spring sunshine streaming through my kitchen window. She'd explained that responsible families planned ahead. Made arrangements for aging and incapacity. Her voice had been patient. Reasonable. Like she was explaining something obvious to someone slow. I had signed without question. Trusted without hesitation. The power of attorney document looked different now under the harsh kitchen light. Legal language that gave Clara control over my finances. My healthcare decisions. My living arrangements. My entire existence reduced to someone else's discretionary authority. It looked like a velvet rope at an exclusive club. With my name written on the wrong side. The morning light was beginning to creep through my kitchen window. Gray dawn dissolving the darkness. I thought about all the damaged books I'd repaired during my years at the library bindery. How you learned to recognize what could be saved with careful attention. And what needed to be discarded before the damage spread to healthy pages. Sometimes the kindest thing was to stop trying to fix what was broken beyond repair. Sometimes preservation meant cutting away the infected parts. I picked up my phone with steady fingers. Dialed Ruth Choi's office number from memory. Her voicemail picked up after 4 rings. Professional greeting. Instructions to leave detailed messages. I told her machine that I needed to schedule an emergency appointment. To discuss revoking legal documents. To rewrite my will completely. To establish protective trusts for my grandson. My voice sounded calm, determined, like someone who had finally stopped apologizing for existing. I hung up and looked at the scattered papers covering my kitchen table. Decades of receipts and canceled checks. Evidence of careful financial sacrifice documented with obsessive precision. But I had never kept track of what mattered most. My own worth. My own needs. My own right to be valued rather than simply useful. The decision crystallized in my chest like ice forming on winter glass. Clear and sharp and unbreakable. This wasn't about punishment or revenge or settling old scores with bitter satisfaction. This wasn't about teaching lessons or making points or winning arguments. This was about stepping off a cliff and discovering I had wings after all. I gathered the receipts back into their cardboard tomb. 40 years of financial archaeology. The power of attorney went into a separate pile, along with the old will. Documents that belonged to a different version of myself. A version who believed that love required constant payment. That family meant keeping score. That being needed was the same thing as being cherished. I folded the legal pad with its brutal mathematical truth. Filed it between pages of more pleasant fiction. The kitchen clock showed 5:47 a.m. Early enough to catch Ruth before her first appointment. Late enough to know this decision would survive the cruel light of morning. I made coffee instead of tea this time. Strong and black and unforgiving. The way my father had preferred it during the years when everything cost too much. Simple sustenance. No performance required. The lighthouse magnet caught the first real sunlight of the day. Leo's gift holding steady on my refrigerator door. 3 years of faithful service. 3 years of unconditional presence. Some beacons guide ships safely home to harbors they've always known. Others illuminate paths leading toward shores that exist only in possibility. I was ready to discover what kind of lighthouse I was meant to be. The phone rang at exactly 8 a.m. Ruth's voice was professional but warm. She had received my message. Could see me at 10:30 if the matter was truly urgent. I told her it was the most urgent thing I'd ever done. The most important decision I'd made in decades. She said she would clear her morning schedule. That she would have documents prepared. That we would fix whatever needed fixing. I thanked her and hung up. Looked at the kitchen table now cleared of its paper evidence. The surface was clean, ready for whatever came next. Ready for documents that would reflect who I was becoming rather than who I had been. Outside my window, the city was waking up. Cars starting, coffee brewing, normal lives beginning normal days. I wasn't part of that normal world anymore. I was something different now. Someone who had stopped waiting for permission to value herself. Someone who had learned the difference between being loved and being used. Someone who was finally ready to write her own story on pages that belonged to no one else. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. I sold the walk-up apartment I had sanded and painted through 3 recessions. The same apartment where Clara had taken her first steps across hardwood floors I'd refinished by hand. Where I'd nursed her through chickenpox and algebra and her first broken heart. Where I'd lived for 37 years believing permanence was possible. Realtor Selena Park remembered me from a refinance back in 2006 when the world still made sense. She ran her finger across my kitchen windowsill and smiled. "Still the neatest windows on Oak Street," she said. I had scrubbed those sills every Saturday for decades. Ritual disguised as cleaning. The apartment showed well. Afternoon light streaming through windows that had never been dirty. Hardwood floors that gleamed like honey. Crown molding I'd restored during the Clinton years. 3 offers arrived within a week. Each one higher than I'd dared hope. I chose the couple who wrote a personal letter. A nurse and a mail carrier. They'd fallen in love with the afternoon light in the living room. The way shadows moved across the walls. Young love recognizing a place where older love had once flourished. I didn't cry at the closing. I had cried enough on things that didn't deserve tears. The proceeds went exactly where Ruth Joy had arranged them. Distributed according to my new instructions. Most of it secured in an education trust for Leo. Protected from anyone's changing moods or sudden needs. The rest bought me a small life at Harbor Pines. A riverside community that didn't pretend to be anything grand. Just clean rooms and quiet neighbors and a view of water that moved regardless of human drama. My new apartment was a third the size of the old one. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a kitchenette that faced east. No space for anyone else's belongings. No room for anyone else's expectations. Perfect proportions for a life that belonged entirely to me. Gwen managed the front desk with efficient kindness. She clipped visitor badges and remembered names. Never asked for stories that hadn't been freely offered. The first morning, she knocked on my door with paperwork about garbage pickup and community guidelines. Her voice was warm but respectful of boundaries I was still learning to draw. On my second day, Mrs. Delgado from 2C appeared with a plate of ginger cookies. They smelled like Christmas morning and childhood safety. Like kitchens where love lived quietly. She asked if I needed a ride anywhere on Thursday. Her husband Harold golfed near St. Bridget's. They could swing by the hospital if I had appointments. The offer was simple. No strings attached. No ledgers to balance later. I said yes before I could think of reasons to refuse. The word felt strange in my mouth. Like speaking a language I'd forgotten how to use. Yes to help. Yes to kindness from strangers. Yes to community without obligation. My new room settled around me like a well-fitted coat. Everything within arm's reach. A kettle on the narrow stovetop. 3 books on a painted shelf Leo had built in shop class. The photograph of him with the fox-shaped kite. 10 years old and gap-toothed and infinitely trusting. My lighthouse magnet found its place on the small refrigerator. Faithful as always. I slept without the hallway clock's relentless ticking. Without the weight of empty rooms echoing back silence. The river outside my window moved with ancient patience. It had seen other people start over. Other lives rebuilding themselves from whatever pieces remained. On the community bulletin board, a flyer asked for volunteers. People to welcome new residents. I told Gwen I was good with names and first impressions. Good with helping people who were learning to begin again. I almost added that I was excellent with broken spines. But she wouldn't understand that reference. The library bindery felt like another lifetime. Another woman's careful expertise. Harbor Pines had its own rhythm. Coffee in the common room at 7. Mail delivery at 10:30. Lunch served family style for anyone who wanted company with their soup and sandwiches. I started joining the meals. Not every day, but more often than I'd expected. Conversations about weather and grandchildren and television shows I'd never watched. Normal talk that required no performance. No careful editing of uncomfortable truths. Mr. Appleton complained about everything with theatrical enthusiasm. The coffee was too weak. The soup too salty. But he showed up every day. Complained like a man auditioning to be loved for his predictable opinions. Lorraine knitted scarves for a homeless shelter downtown. Her fingers worked constantly, creating warmth for strangers. Mrs. Chen grew herbs on her windowsill, brought fresh basil to dinner and explained which dishes needed brightening. Small kindnesses offered without ceremony, without expecting anything in return. I had forgotten that generosity could exist without keeping score. The first Sunday, Harold Delgado knocked with coffee and a newspaper. Asked if I wanted to sit on the pier. We didn't talk much, just watched the river carry away whatever the current had collected overnight. Leaves, plastic bottles, pieces of other people's discarded lives. The water didn't judge what it carried. It simply moved everything downstream toward whatever ocean waited. I understood something about rivers that morning. About letting go without bitterness. About accepting that some things were meant to float away. When Harold walked back toward the building, he asked if I played cards. There was a weekly game on Wednesday nights. Nothing serious, just something to do with hands and minds. I told him I'd learned poker during my college years. Before marriage taught me to fold every hand. He laughed and said poker was perfect. That Wednesday nights could use someone who understood bluffing. I realized I'd forgotten how to laugh with people who expected nothing from the sound. That evening, Leo called to ask about my new place. His voice carried genuine curiosity. I described the river view and the kind neighbors and the way morning light filled my small kitchen. He asked if I was happy. The question was direct, unafraid of complicated answers. I told him I was learning what happiness felt like when you stopped measuring it against other people's expectations. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said that sounded like the most honest thing he'd ever heard. Before hanging up, he asked if he could visit next weekend. Bring groceries and make breakfast. I said yes without hesitation. Another yes that tasted like freedom. Like choosing what I wanted instead of what others needed from me. After the call, I sat by my window watching lights reflect on the moving water. Other apartments glowed with other people's evening routines. Dinners and homework and television programs. Normal lives continuing their normal patterns. But I wasn't separate from that normalcy anymore. I was part of a different kind of community. One where people chose to be present rather than obligated to appear. Where kindness wasn't tallied on invisible ledgers. Where helping happened because someone had the capacity to help, not because debt required payment. The river carried the last light of day downstream. Tomorrow would bring new currents and different weather. But the water would keep moving regardless. Patient and persistent and beautifully indifferent to human complications. I was learning to move like that river. Forward, without looking back. Without carrying what didn't belong to me. Learning to flow around obstacles instead of trying to move them. Learning that some of the best destinations were discovered by accident. By people brave enough to trust the current. My reflection wavered in the dark window glass. Older face. Steadier eyes. Someone I was just beginning to recognize. Someone who had finally stopped apologizing for taking up space in her own life. The lighthouse magnet caught the lamp's glow from across the small room. Still faithful, still constant, but now it felt less like a beacon calling ships home to familiar harbors. more like a light illuminating whatever shore I chose to explore next. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. I called Leo on a Wednesday when the sky couldn't decide between rain and mercy. Gray clouds hung low over the river like indecision made visible. Like weather that had forgotten its own purpose. He answered on the second ring. His voice bright with 16-year-old enthusiasm. "Grandma," he said, and I could hear his smile through the phone. Guess what happened today? He'd made the robotics team at school. Advanced placement. Only 12 students selected from over 60 applicants. I didn't understand the technical details he explained. Sensors and programming languages. Lines of code like recipes without flour. But I understood joy when I heard it. Pure and uncomplicated and deserving of celebration. I told him I was proud. That I'd always known he had gifts for building things that worked. He paused, then asked if I was okay. If the move to Harbor Pines had been difficult. His concern was genuine, careful, like he'd been thinking about my transition for weeks. I explained that change was hard but necessary. Like surgery that hurt before it healed. He asked if his mother knew about my new address yet. The question carried weight. 16-year-old awareness of family dynamics he shouldn't have to navigate. I told him his mother and I were working through some complicated issues. Adult problems that weren't his responsibility to solve. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he wished he could drive already. That he would take me to my medical appointments if he had a license. The offer pierced something in my chest. Kindness from someone who owed me nothing but gave everything freely. I told him that knowing he would be there was gift enough. That intention mattered as much as action. Before we hung up, he asked if he could visit on Saturday. Bring ingredients for pancakes and maybe stay for lunch. I said yes immediately. Another yes that tasted like choosing happiness over convenience. Saturday morning arrived with October sunshine and the smell of leaves beginning their colorful surrender. Leo knocked at exactly 9 o'clock. Punctual like his grandfather had been. Reliable like his mother had never learned to be. He carried a paper bag from the bakery downtown. A small wrapped package tucked under his arm. His hair was longer now. Almost touching his shoulders. His face had lost the last softness of childhood. But his eyes were the same. Kind. Curious. Ready to find good in whatever situation presented itself. He handed me the wrapped package first. Something he'd made in shop class, he explained. Inside was a keychain hammered from copper. Thin as a coin. Warm from his pocket. The metal was stamped with simple words. "I see you. It's probably dorky," he said. His cheeks flushed with the vulnerability of creative expression. I closed my fingers around the copper disc. It felt substantial. Real. Like proof of something important. I told him it was perfect. That it was the most meaningful gift I'd received in years. He smiled then. The gap-toothed grin was gone. But something essential remained unchanged. His capacity to notice. To care. To show up when showing up mattered most. We unpacked groceries on my small counter. Real maple syrup. Fresh blueberries. Eggs from chickens with names. He moved through my tiny kitchen with easy familiarity. Opening drawers. Finding what he needed without asking. Like he belonged in this space. Like my new life had room for the people who truly mattered. The pancake batter was too thick at first. Then too thin when he added extra milk. We laughed about cooking disasters and family recipes that never quite worked as advertised. Normal conversation between people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. While the pancakes cooked, he asked about my old job at the library bindery. "Tell me about fixing broken books," he said. "I want to understand what you used to do." So I explained about paperback spines that split from overuse, hardcover bindings that separated from their pages, how you learned to assess damage before attempting repair, how some books could be saved with patience and the right adhesive, how others needed to be retired with dignity before the damage spread to healthy sections. He listened with complete attention, asked questions that showed he understood the metaphors hiding beneath technical details. "You were a book doctor," he said finally. "You helped stories stay alive longer than they might have otherwise." The observation was so precise it made my throat tight. He saw connections that adults often missed. We ate pancakes with too much vanilla and syrup that ran in golden rivers across white plates. He washed dishes like someone learning choreography. Sleeves pushed up, movements careful but confident. His willingness to help felt natural, unforced, like kindness was simply how he moved through the world. While he dried the last plate, he asked if I was scared about being on my own. The question was direct, unafraid of complicated answers or uncomfortable truths. I told him I was scared every day. But not the same way I used to be scared. Before, I was afraid of not being needed, of becoming irrelevant to people I loved. Now I was afraid of wasting whatever time remained, of not living fully in whatever life I'd chosen. He nodded like he understood the difference. Like 16 years had taught him something valuable about authentic fear versus inherited anxiety. He asked if I missed the old apartment, the familiar rooms and neighborhood rhythms. I explained that I missed the memory of who I used to be in those spaces. The woman who believed sacrifice always led to appreciation. But I didn't miss feeling invisible in my own life. Feeling like furniture that only mattered when it was useful. He was quiet while he folded the dish towel. Then he said something that stopped my heart. "I want to be the kind of person who shows up. Who notices when people need help. Who doesn't make love conditional on convenience." The words came from someplace deep. Someplace where 16-year-old wisdom lived alongside 16-year-old uncertainty. I told him he already was that kind of person. That showing up was a practice, not a destination. That he'd been showing up for me consistently when others had found reasons to look away. Before he left, we sat on the small pier behind the building. Watched the river carry autumn leaves toward whatever destination rivers choose. He asked if I was angry at his mother. If the changes I'd made were about punishment or revenge. I explained that anger was too expensive for someone my age. That energy spent on resentment was energy stolen from possibility. That I'd made changes to protect what mattered most. Not to hurt anyone, but to stop hurting myself. He understood immediately, nodded like someone who'd already learned that boundaries weren't walls. They were gates that opened for the right people. When he stood to leave, he hugged me with complete commitment. No awkward teenager reluctance. Arms that promised presence. That promised he would keep choosing connection over convenience. After his car disappeared around the corner, I sat alone on the pier. The copper keychain warm in my palm. "I see you" stamped in letters he'd hammered by hand. 4 words that meant everything. That promised witness. That offered the rarest gift of all. Someone who noticed when you existed. Someone who cared that you continued existing. Someone who would keep showing up regardless of weather or mood or circumstance. The river moved past with its usual indifference to human drama, carrying away what needed to go, leaving behind what belonged. I understood something new about legacy that afternoon. About what we pass to the next generation. Not money or property or carefully constructed reputations. But ways of being in the world. Ways of treating people who can't return favors. Ways of showing up when showing up is the only gift that matters. Leo was learning to be present without keeping score. Learning to love without conditions attached. Learning to see people as they actually were rather than as their usefulness suggested. He was becoming someone I would have been proud to know even if we weren't related. Someone who would carry forward whatever was worth preserving from our family's story. Someone who would write new chapters with kindness and attention and unconditional presence. The sun was setting over Harbor Pines when I finally went inside. The copper keychain caught the last light. I attached it to my keyring where it would remind me daily of what Leo had seen. That I was worth noticing. Worth visiting. Worth making pancakes with on Saturday mornings. Worth the kind of love that didn't require payment or performance or perfect behavior. The lighthouse magnet held its steady position on my refrigerator. But now it felt less solitary. Part of a constellation that included copper keychains and 16-year-old wisdom. Part of a family that chose presence over convenience. Connection over obligation. The kind of family I was finally learning to build. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Clara arrived without warning on a Tuesday morning in late October. No phone call. No text message. No courtesy of asking if I was available for confrontation. Gwen knocked on my door first. Her voice careful and professional as always. She announced that my daughter was in the lobby. That Clara was asking to come up to my apartment. The courtesy felt deliberate. A buffer between my new life and my old obligations. I told Gwen to send Clara up. That it was time for whatever conversation couldn't be avoided anymore. I had been expecting this visit since the day I signed the new will. Since the moment I chose myself over their convenience. Clara's footsteps in the hallway were sharp. Purposeful. Like someone preparing for battle. She knocked twice. Quick raps that suggested impatience barely held in check. I opened the door to find her dressed for success and confrontation. Chalk-colored blazer. Heels that clicked authority. A designer tote bag I'd helped pay for during Mark's promotion year. When appearances mattered more than honesty. She stepped into my small apartment without invitation. Scanned the single room like a real estate appraiser. Her eyes took inventory. The narrow kitchenette. The view of the river. The single orchid on my windowsill. "So this is it," she said. Her voice carried disappointment disguised as observation. "This is where you've been hiding since you decided to punish everyone who loves you." I told her it was enough space for someone who'd learned the difference between loving and being used. Her face flushed the way it had when she was 7. When tantrums were still socially acceptable methods of getting attention. She asked why I'd sold the apartment without discussing it with family. Why I'd made major decisions without consulting the people who cared about my welfare. The question sounded rehearsed, like arguments she'd practiced during the drive from her suburban fortress. I explained that I'd consulted the only person whose opinion mattered. Myself. That I'd made decisions based on my own needs rather than everyone else's expectations. She moved to the window. Stared at the river like it had personally offended her sense of proper maternal housing. "You changed everything," she said. "The power of attorney. The will. Leo told me about some trust fund. Her voice carried betrayal and bewilderment in equal measures. Like someone discovering that furniture had developed opinions. I told her that Leo would receive his education money when he turned 18. That he'd earned it through consistent presence and unconditional love. That he'd shown up when showing up mattered most. Clara turned from the window. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears that looked more like frustration than grief. She asked what that meant about her inheritance. About the financial security she'd counted on for retirement planning. The question revealed everything I needed to know about her priorities. About what my life meant in her carefully calculated future. I explained that she would inherit exactly what she'd given me during my medical crisis. The exact measure of support she'd provided when I needed her most. The mathematical precision felt cruel but necessary. Like surgery that hurt before it healed. She asked if I was seriously going to punish her for having work obligations. For trying to build a successful career and provide for her own family. The words came wrapped in reasonableness. In the kind of logic that made selfishness sound responsible. I told her this wasn't about punishment. That punishment required anger and I'd moved beyond anger into something clearer. This was about releasing both of us from a relationship built on transaction rather than affection. About stopping the pretense that obligation was the same thing as love. Clara sat on my small couch. Her perfect posture sagged slightly as the reality settled around her like unwelcome weather. She asked what she was supposed to tell people. Her friends, her colleagues, her husband. How she was supposed to explain that her mother had abandoned the family without warning or discussion. I told her she could tell them whatever story made her feel better about the choices she'd made. That I was no longer responsible for managing her reputation or protecting her from consequences. Clara was quiet for several minutes. The silence felt heavy with 30 years of accumulated disappointment. Finally, she asked if I would consider changing my mind. If we could find some way to repair whatever had gone wrong between us. The question surprised me with its vulnerability. With the possibility that she might actually be capable of reflection. I told her the door was always open if she learned to walk through it without carrying a ledger. If she could visit because she wanted my company rather than because duty demanded appearance. If she could love without keeping score of favors granted and obligations fulfilled. Clara stood up slowly, smoothed her blazer like armor being adjusted for battle. She said she would call me soon. That she needed time to think about everything I'd said. The promise felt hollow, like words people use to end uncomfortable conversations without committing to uncomfortable changes. After she left, I sat in the chair by my window. Watched her car disappear into traffic that would carry her back to her carefully curated life. The apartment felt larger somehow. Like space had expanded to fill the absence of expectation. I thought about the woman who had once fanned Clara's crib during that brutal heatwave. The mother who had sacrificed sleep and comfort and financial security. That woman had been real. Had loved purely and given freely and expected nothing but love in return. But somewhere along the way, that pure love had been corrupted into currency. Into something that could be spent and saved and withheld for maximum leverage. I wasn't angry at Clara for learning to use love as transaction. I had taught her that lesson through years of giving without boundaries. Through decades of saying yes when no would have been healthier for everyone involved. The responsibility was mine. The correction was also mine to make. My phone buzzed with a text message. Leo asking if I wanted company for lunch on Saturday. If he could bring groceries and cook something new he'd learned in his school's culinary arts program. I typed yes immediately. Another yes that tasted like choosing joy over complicated history. Like choosing the family that chose me back. The river outside my window moved with its usual indifference to human drama. Carrying away leaves that had served their purpose. Making room for whatever spring would eventually bring. I understood something about seasons that afternoon. About the necessity of endings that make space for better beginnings. Clara might learn to love without conditions. Might discover that relationships built on presence were stronger than relationships built on transaction. Or she might not. Either way, I had stepped out of the role of family ATM. Family therapist. Family scapegoat for everyone else's emotional immaturity. I had chosen to be grandmother to Leo. Neighbor to the Delgados. Friend to people who wanted my company without requiring my service. The lighthouse magnet caught the afternoon sun streaming through my window. Steady as always. But now it felt less like a beacon calling lost ships home to familiar harbors. More like a light illuminating paths that led toward shores I was still discovering. Shores where love existed without price tags. Where presence mattered more than presence. Where family meant the people who showed up consistently rather than the people who shared DNA accidentally. The copper keychain in my pocket grew warm against my palm. Leo's gift. Leo's promise. I see you hammered into metal that would last longer than resentment. Longer than disappointment. Longer than the fear that love was something you had to earn through perfect behavior. Clara would make her choice about what kind of daughter she wanted to be going forward. I had already made my choice about what kind of mother I refused to be anymore. The kind who apologized for having needs. Who disappeared to make other people's lives more convenient. Who measured her worth by her usefulness to people who took that usefulness for granted. I was learning to be visible in my own life. Learning to matter to myself as much as I'd always mattered to others. Learning that the most revolutionary thing a woman my age could do was refuse to become invisible just because other people found her presence inconvenient. The afternoon light slanted lower. Evening was coming. Tomorrow would bring new possibilities for connection. New chances to practice love without keeping score. New opportunities to choose presence over obligation. The river kept moving. I kept learning. Both of us heading toward destinations we couldn't see but somehow trusted to be exactly where we needed to arrive. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Harbor Pines held an autumn picnic under maples that let go like dignified confetti. Someone had brought a record player that popped and hummed before finding its rhythm. Then a trumpet wandered home through the speakers. The sound floated over folding tables covered with potluck offerings. Casseroles that had fed families for decades. Desserts that carried stories in their recipes. Mr. Appleton complained about the apple cider. Like a man auditioning to be loved for his predictable opinions. Too sweet, he announced to anyone within hearing distance. But he drank 3 cups anyway. Stood near the dessert table making pronouncements about proper pie crust technique. Lorraine had knitted tiny mittens for the community center's toy drive. Her fingers never stopped moving. Creating warmth for children she would never meet. Mrs. Chen demonstrated proper dumpling folding to anyone interested in learning. Her hands moved with practiced precision. Muscle memory from a lifetime of feeding people. Leo showed up in a sweater the color of rust and October afternoons. He carried a paper bag that smelled like cinnamon and possibility. Inside were apples from an orchard he'd visited with his robotics team. A jar of homemade jam that tasted like childhood memories no one had actually experienced. Perfect sweetness. Perfect balance. The kind of gift that mattered because someone had thought to bring it. He told me about the college essay he'd written for his summer program application. The prompt had asked about a moment that changed his understanding of love. I wrote about the van I didn't ride and the pancake I did make, he said. His voice carried quiet pride in finding truth worth sharing. About learning that love without respect is just decoration. That showing up matters more than showing off. The words came from someplace deep. Someplace where 16-year-old wisdom lived without apology. Someone started the music again. A song from decades past when dancing was simpler and hearts broke more quietly. Leo asked if I wanted to dance. Not because he was supposed to ask. Because he genuinely wanted to move to music with his grandmother. We danced badly and without shame. For 3 minutes, time felt like something you could hold with both hands and the right song. My feet remembered rhythms from when dancing meant possibility instead of performance. When moving together was enough. Other residents clapped along, not politely, but with genuine appreciation for joy witnessed in real time. Mrs. Delgado took photographs with an old camera that required actual film. Each picture would be precious because it couldn't be deleted or retaken endlessly. A maple leaf fell at my feet as the song ended. Orange and red and perfectly timed. Like the tree had been waiting for the right moment to let go. Leo picked it up and handed it to me. A small ceremony that required no words. Just recognition that some moments deserve keeping. After the music ended, we sat on the pier watching the river carry autumn toward whatever destination rivers choose. Leo asked why I had changed my will. The question came without judgment. Just 16-year-old curiosity about adult decisions. I explained that love without respect becomes decoration. That I had tired of being ornamental in my own story. That I wanted him to understand the difference between being needed and being valued. Between obligation and affection. He nodded like someone who had already learned that lesson through observation. Through watching how people treated each other when they thought no one was paying attention. I want to be the kind of person who shows up, he said. Not because I have to. Because I want to. The distinction mattered. The choice mattered more. Before he left, Leo asked if he could bring friends to meet me sometime. Kids from the robotics team who were curious about my library bindery work. Who wanted to understand how someone learned to repair things that seemed beyond saving. I told him yes immediately. Another yes that tasted like possibility. Like being someone worth introducing to people who mattered to him. After he drove away, I sat alone on the pier. The maple leaf pressed between pages of a book I was reading. Evidence of perfect timing. The river moved past carrying whatever the current had collected. Leaves and debris and pieces of other people's discarded lives. But also reflection. Light bouncing off moving water. Beauty created by accident and intention working together. I understood something about reflection that evening. About how the best images appeared when the water was moving rather than still. How clarity came through motion rather than stagnation. The community room was filling up for the weekly card game. Voices carrying through thin walls. Laughter that sounded like belonging. Harold knocked on my door with a deck of cards and a question. ready to lose some money to people who understood the difference between bluffing and lying. I followed him to a table where strangers were becoming neighbors, where weekly games were building something that felt like family without the obligation. Mrs. Delgado dealt the first hand with professional efficiency. She'd learned poker during World War II, when rationed sugar made every bet matter. Mr. Appleton complained about his cards like someone auditioning for sympathy. But his eyes were sharp, calculating. He understood odds better than he pretended. Lorraine knitted between hands, her fingers creating something useful while her mind focused on cards that might or might not matter. I won the first pot with a pair of sevens. Nothing spectacular, just cards that happened to be better than what anyone else was holding. The victory felt larger than it was, like proof that sometimes showing up was enough, that you didn't need perfect cards to win occasionally. The conversation wandered from grandchildren to medical appointments to television shows that made more sense 20 years ago. Normal talk between people who had learned that ordinary was enough, that extraordinary was overrated. Around 10 o'clock, we settled accounts with quarters and dollar bills. Small stakes that made the game feel playful rather than desperate. I walked back to my apartment with $3 more than I'd started with. Not enough to matter financially. Enough to matter in ways that had nothing to do with money. The lighthouse magnet caught the hallway light as I unlocked my door. Steady as always, but now it felt part of a larger constellation, part of a community that valued presence over performance, that measured wealth in laughter and shared stories rather than bank balances. I made tea and sat by my window watching other apartments settle into evening routines. Lights dimming, television programs ending, but not silence. Not the kind of quiet that felt like emptiness. The building held the comfortable sounds of people who had chosen to live near each other, who had created family from proximity and intention. The copper keychain caught the lamp light. Leo's gift. Leo's promise. I see you. Hammered into metal that would outlast disappointment. 3 words that had become my daily reminder. That someone noticed when I existed. That my presence mattered to people who chose to care. The picnic had been small. Just residents and a few family members sharing food under trees that were letting go of summer. But it had felt enormous. Like a celebration of ordinary life lived with intention. Of connections made without agenda. Of joy that didn't require justification or explanation. Just recognition that some moments were worth stopping for. Worth dancing badly for. Worth pressing leaves between book pages to remember. The river outside my window moved with its usual patience, carrying away what needed to go. Reflecting light that made everything look possible. I was learning to move like that river. Forward without looking back, carrying only what served the journey. Reflecting light instead of absorbing darkness. Creating beauty through motion rather than standing still. Tomorrow would bring another day of small choices. Another opportunity to practice love without keeping score. Another chance to show up for people who showed up for me. Not because we had to. Because we wanted to. The lighthouse magnet held its position on my refrigerator. No longer calling ships home to familiar harbors. Now illuminating paths that led toward shores I was still discovering. Shores where joy existed without explanation. Where family meant the people who chose to dance with you under trees that knew when to let go. Where home was built from small kindnesses offered without ceremony. From presents that didn't require payment. From ordinary moments that became extraordinary through the simple act of paying attention. The picnic was over. The cards were put away. But what remained was larger than either event. A sense of belonging that had nothing to do with blood or obligation. Everything to do with choice and consistent presence. The kind of family I was finally learning to build. One maple leaf at a time. One badly danced song at a time. One yes at a time to invitations that led toward joy rather than duty. The evening settled around Harbor Pines like a well-worn blanket. Comfortable. Familiar. Chosen. I was home. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. I began waking before the light. Not from worry anymore, but because I wanted to see the river wake up too. The way darkness lifted like a blanket being folded. The way the water caught the first rays and threw them back like promises. 5:30 became my favorite time of day. When the world belonged to people who chose to be awake. Who wanted to witness beginning rather than ending. I brewed coffee in the mug with the hairline crack. The one I'd mended years ago with careful glue and infinite patience. I turned the mug so the seam faced me. A daily reminder that repaired didn't mean fragile. It meant chosen. It meant worth fixing. The river moved regardless of human drama. Regardless of who was watching or why they were awake. It carried away leaves that had served their purpose. Made room for whatever spring would eventually bring. I understood rivers now. Their patience. Their indifference to things that didn't matter. Their commitment to forward motion. A plain white envelope arrived on a Tuesday. No return address. My name written in careful script. Inside, 4 words on expensive paper: I'm sorry I failed you. No signature. No explanation. No promise of change or request for forgiveness. Just acknowledgement of failure. Clean and simple and probably true. I set the card on my kitchen counter. Didn't frame it or throw it away. Let it exist without ceremony or decision. Sometimes silence was the only response that made sense. Ruth Joy called to confirm the final documents had been filed. Everything legal and binding and exactly as I'd requested. The trust for Leo was ironclad. Protected from anyone's changing moods or sudden financial emergencies. My new will reflected my actual priorities. My chosen family rather than my accidental one. The power of attorney was revoked permanently. No one could make decisions for me except me. I thanked Ruth and hung up. Looked around my small apartment with fresh eyes. This was what independence looked like. 4 walls that belonged to someone who had stopped apologizing for existing. Furniture arranged for my comfort. Books chosen for my pleasure. Food purchased because I enjoyed eating it. A life curated by the person who had to live it. Gwen knocked with a clipboard and a question. Would I consider welcoming the newest resident? Someone who might benefit from a familiar face on her first day. I said yes immediately. Another yes that tasted like purpose. Like being useful in ways that felt good rather than obligatory. The new resident was named Dorothy. 73. Recently widowed. Moving from a house that had become too full of echoes. Her hands shook slightly when she signed paperwork. The tremor of someone whose world had shifted without permission. I remembered that tremor. The way grief lived in your body before your mind accepted what was happening. I showed Dorothy to her apartment. Helped her find light switches and thermostats and the best angle for watching the river. She asked if I missed my old place. The familiar rooms and neighborhood rhythms. I told her I missed the memory of who I used to be in those spaces. But not the person who had lived there afraid of being forgotten. That this place felt like coming home to myself. Like choosing who I wanted to be rather than who others needed me to be. She nodded like someone who understood the difference. Who was learning that some endings made room for better beginnings. Mrs. Delgado appeared with homemade soup and an invitation. Thursday afternoon coffee if Dorothy was interested in company. No pressure. Just an offer of presence from someone who understood the weight of empty hours. I watched Dorothy's face soften. Watched her accept kindness without suspicion or complicated calculations. Sometimes the best gift you could give someone was the chance to help someone else. On procedure day, Mrs. Delgado waited in the hospital lobby with a crossword puzzle and mints. Tasted like patience. She didn't ask questions about family or why I was alone. Just offered her presence like a gift that required no wrapping. Nurse Mateo secured the IV with the same gentle competence he'd shown during my consultation. Tucked the copper keychain under my palm so I had something real to hold onto. The procedure took 2 hours. Mapping irregular pathways. Correcting rhythms that had forgotten their proper timing. I woke up in recovery with a heart that beat steadier. More like the organ I remembered from younger years. Mrs. Delgado drove me home through afternoon traffic that moved like a slow prayer. Red lights that gave us time to breathe. Green lights that promised forward motion toward whatever came next. Back at Harbor Pines, she helped me to my apartment. Made sure I had water and medication and a way to call for help if needed. She left soup in my refrigerator and her phone number by my bed. Practical kindness that asked for nothing in return. That evening, I sat by my window watching lights reflect on moving water. Other lives continuing their evening routines. But I didn't feel separate anymore. I felt part of something larger. A community that measured wealth in shared meals and offered rides. In crossword puzzles waded through medical procedures. In soup left without ceremony or expectation of thanks. The lighthouse magnet caught the lamp's glow. Still faithful after all these months of change. But now it felt less like a beacon calling lost ships home to familiar harbors. More like a light illuminating paths that led toward shores I was still discovering. Shores where love existed without ledgers. Where help was offered because someone had the capacity to help. Where family meant the people who showed up consistently rather than the people who shared accidental DNA. Leo texted to ask how the procedure had gone. If I needed anything. If he could visit on Saturday. I replied with 3 words: all went well. And then always yes to Saturday. The copper keychain grew warm in my palm. 4 words that had become my daily anchor. I see you hammered into metal that would outlast resentment. 4 words that reminded me daily that someone noticed when I existed. That my presence mattered to people who chose to care. The procedure was over. My heart beat with corrected rhythm. The future stretched ahead like an unwritten story. A story I would write myself on pages that belonged to no one else. Dorothy knocked at exactly 8 p.m. Asked if I had a moment for tea and conversation with someone who was learning how to be alone. I invited her in. Put the kettle on. Listened to her talk about 37 years of marriage and a house that echoed with phantom conversations. About children who lived their own lives in distant cities. About learning that loneliness and solitude were different experiences entirely. I told her about daughters who confused being needed with being valued. About the difference between family by blood and family by choice. About discovering that the most revolutionary thing a woman our age could do was refuse to become invisible. We drank Earl Grey with honey. Talked until the river outside my window had carried the last light toward whatever ocean waited. Two women who had learned to choose themselves. Who had discovered that starting over was possible at any age. That home could be built from small kindnesses and shared understanding. From presents that didn't require payment. From the simple recognition that some people were worth showing up for. Worth making tea for on Tuesday evenings. After Dorothy left, I opened my notebook to a fresh page. Wrote without bitterness or regret. To the woman I was, you were not a burden. You were convenient. You are neither now. I put down the pen and listened to the room breathe. To the building settle around lives that had chosen each other. The river moved past regardless. Carrying away what needed to go. Reflecting light that made everything look possible. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities for connection. New chances to practice love without keeping score. New invitations to choose presence over performance. Joy over obligation. The lighthouse magnet held steady on my refrigerator. Part of a constellation that included copper keychains and Tuesday evening tea. Part of a life that belonged entirely to the person who had finally learned to live it. The space I had chosen did not echo. It received. And in that quiet receiving, I understood the simplest inventory of all. What I gave freely, what returned naturally, what I finally kept for myself. The mathematics of a life lived on my own terms. Equations that balanced without sacrifice or resentment. The evening settled around Harbor Pines like a blessing. Tomorrow was coming. I was ready for it. Ready to tend my own light. Ready to guide my own ship toward whatever shores awaited discovery. Ready to write the next chapter on pages that would never again belong to anyone but me. To build my own lighthouse. To tend my own light. The kitchen clock ticked toward evening. Tomorrow I would call the medical transport service. Make my own arrangements. Take care of my own heart. For the first time in decades, that felt like enough.